Welcome back to part 2, where we are refining the imperfections in our mat. So how do we fix this? Well, for one thing, I could try adjusting these settings so that they animate into a more useful arrangement here, so that it's a little bit cleaner, and maybe between here and here they will all transform so that, like, here it is the way it is, but down here we're going to make things a little bit more friendly with this lighting. So okay, let's find that frame, like let's say over here, where these settings are all going to be where they are. I think I'll animate I guess clip black, clip white, shrink and grow, softness, maybe the pre-blur. So I've added keyframes for all those settings. Let me press U here and then hide the motion trackers, because that's a bunch of keyframes we don't need to see right now. And here are all those keyframes we just made. I'm going to go ahead and select them and press F9 to make them eased keyframes, so it doesn't just kind of hit the value instantly, it just kind of softly lands there. I'm going to go back here, right over here, and let's play with these to make this look a little better. Let's clip black a lot, like that. Let's see what clip white does for us. Not much. Let's pre-blur a lot more, soften this out. And I guess that's about it. And then after that, I mean, there's still kind of a sliver of green. We're going to address that, but I think a more pressing issue is these giant markers. Because if I had to deliver something right now as an effect, I could probably, you know, live with that being weird for a couple of frames, but I'm not going to live with the whole shot having those dots on there. So let's address that right now. How do we do that? We're just dealing with this black and white matte, so we could just hide these things with little black patches. So let's create one of those patches. I'm going to press Command Y and create another solid. This time I'll make it 300 by 300. And I'm not going to change its color yet because I want it to be visible. So I'll keep it blue, and I'll make an ellipse shape on it, on its whole size. So let's go ahead and open the mask properties of that ellipse. I'm going to shrink it, like unexpand it a little bit, and I'm going to soften its edges. And I'll go ahead and make it a little bit transparent, just for clarity. And one of these is going to go over every dot. But I don't want to certainly like keyframe it over all of this motion. Luckily, we don't have to, because we still have the tracking data from the plate, and that data includes the center of each of these circles already, because that's what we were tracking in the first place. So what I'll do is I'll call this first dot marker patch 1, and I'll open its position properties by pressing P. And here in the tracking data, for the track point number 1, which is that same one, I'm going to select the feature center, selecting all of its keyframes. I'll go on the first one here. Press Command C, and then choose the position property of the marker patch. Press Command V, so that now it's keyframed on every frame exactly where it needs to be. It's perfect. Let me press Command Shift H temporarily just to get rid of all those displays. And it's always where we need it to be. All we need to do now is just scale it down so that it's covering the marker, but it's not going beyond the edges of the panel. And for most of the shot, this is all we need, because you know, it's covering it. But now here at the end, I'm going to go ahead and keyframe its size. Actually, I won't touch its size because it's big enough to cover everything we need, but I'm going to animate by pressing M twice, MM, oh, maybe twice again. I'm going to animate that expansion. So I'll add a keyframe here, press F9 to make it eased, and then I'll go to where the panel is at its largest over here, and just reduce or increase the expansion so that it makes sure that it keeps covering the now bigger marker. And now I can go ahead and duplicate these to make 4 of them. Maybe I'll just open this up right now and open the position property for each of these, except the first one because we're done with that one. And I'll go ahead and choose the feature center. Let's go to the first frame. Choose the feature center of track point 2, copy, paste to the position of marker patch 2. Number 3 here, copy, paste to number 3. And number 4, copy, paste to number 4. Now we can close all this and look at what we got. All the markers are in the right place. Rather, all the patches are on top of each of the markers. And everything seems to be decent. I think I might want to shrink these two guys, 3 and 4, or 2 and 3. Let's open that's, I guess I was looking for 2 and 4. I'm going to take their scale down a little bit because they're getting too close to the edges of the panel there. But now they're going to increase proportionally. So this all looks good. Even when my hand comes up, it's not really touching any of the markers, so we're good there. If it did, I would just manually correct that. But here, let's just go through and see how the markers need to appear and disappear. Starting with the top left. So that's marker patch 1. I guess I might need to animate its position, scale, and even rotation maybe. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the first frame. Well, here's the first frame where it starts to be okay. So I'm going to maybe keyframe its scale there. Go down, shrink the scale a little bit. Go down, reposition. Here I'll keyframe the scale. Scale it down again. And at that point, it's no longer needed. So this is going to be the end point of this marker patch. I'm going to press Alt left bracket so that before this frame, it doesn't even exist. Let's move on to patch number 2. Position, scale, rotation. Here it's fine. Keyframe scale, go back 1. Maybe I'll just move it like this. Go back 1, move it again. This is kind of, you know, imprecise here, but everything is already so blurry. This should work. So this is the first frame where it appears. So I'm going to press Alt left bracket here. Let's move on to number 3, position, scale, rotation. Here's where we're fine. Keyframe scale, go back, reposition, reposition. Yeah, I guess I'm not needing to animate the scale too much. Well, here I do. I'm gonna keyframe scale again, shrink it, and here I actually do need to keyframe rotation as well. So let's press W and rotate this, and shrink it some more. Get rid of that marker like that. And that's its first frame, Alt left bracket. And finally, number 4, position, rotation, scale. Let's see what we got. We're good there. Just move that scale keyframe, shrink it. Keyframe its rotation just before, I mean the keyframe, the frame ahead. Rotate it. See if we could do this. Fit this guy in here. It sort of works, I guess. And that's its first frame. So Alt left bracket. All right, now that we did this, we actually need to turn these guys into something that will cover these markers. So for one thing, let's make their opacity 100%. For this first one, I'm going to press Command-Shift-Y to kind of open the settings of the solid. Not make a new solid, but open the settings of the one I've selected. And now I can change it from that blue color to black. And rather than do that one by one with each of them, I can go here into the project window, and that black solid is listed here as an asset. You can see it's used one time. So if I select the rest of the markers and hold Alt and drag this down onto them, it's going to replace the blue for the black. So all of them are good. And now they're actually genuinely covering up the markers. Well, the markers are gone, but at the beginning we still have kind of a mess. Let's take care of this by adding a new solid that's purely white and is the size of the composition. I'll hide it. I'll add a rectangle, let's see, over here, like this. I'll add a keyframe its path, adjust its boundaries to just outside of the panel, like this, and then just go quickly frame by frame. Maybe I'll just go ahead and get rid of this keyframe, go all the way down here. This way I've created a little window that makes sure we're only seeing this information and none of that. Now, when I make it visible and change the mask to subtract, it's basically a white clip with a hole that only lets this show through. But at a certain point after this frame, I'm just going to double click here, and that way the mask becomes full screen. So we've gotten rid of my little face part there. But I'm afraid there's no way around fixing the beginning. Let's see. Let's actually see what we're dealing with in terms of how this matte works on our footage. Let's duplicate the plate, and the one underneath, let's get rid of all of its effects, which is key light. And we're going to have to take everything we made that helps the matte and pre-compose it, pressing Command-Shift-C. Let's just call this matte. And now it all exists as one clip here, so we can designate the plate underneath. If we press F4, we can choose the matte above it as its Luma matte. And now it's actually affecting the transparency. But this is not, like, until it gets to right here, it's not looking that good. I mean, it's all like, what is this stuff here? And, you know, this is very messy. So I'm going to go ahead and not be lazy and go in and do a little bit of manual work to get this to look decent for these first few frames. So let's enter the matte. And let's duplicate our footage here at the bottom, bring it to the top, get rid of its effects, and look at this closely. And again, decide where does it look acceptable. Let's do it here. I think this is the first frame, or this is the first frame where I would say I will allow this matte to take over. So I'm going to go ahead and set the out point for this footage out here. And until that point, from the beginning, or from where we first see the player, from, I suppose, this frame, I'm going to create a manual mask. So let's go to the very last one. And I'm going to use the pen tool to just draw the shape of the player. This time, there's no margin of any kind. It has to be as precise as possible. Let's press M and turn it to the mask to none for now so that we can just see the shape of the mask, but it's not doing anything to our footage. I'm going to go ahead and adjust it to the corners as close as possible. Maybe I need to create some different kind of visible color. I'm not sure. Maybe reduce the exposure here. Okay, that's good. This is good. This one is right here. I think I'll make this about, give this a feather of 2. And that's about it. And keyframe its path on this frame. I'll go down maybe 4 frames, or 3. Yeah, like all the way here. Let's see. And again, for motion blur purposes, because now we do have motion blur on masks as well, which, by the way, let's turn it on. I'm going to go one more frame. Let's make it visible. And kind of roughly position. We're never going to see this frame, but we want our mask to exist in like a place that makes sense for this frame, so that on its first frame where it appears, it does have the appropriate motion blur. Let's set this as its in point again. Now we're going to go back in there and add those in between frames. So let's go ahead and fix the position of these corners. Here. This is so much fun. Not. And one more. Last one. I'm pressing my middle mouse button to scroll across. You could also do it by holding spacebar and left clicking, but recently I've gotten into the habit of doing the middle mouse button because a lot of other software does the middle mouse button, so it's just easier to remember. Okay, so we have this manual mask, but I'm also going to need a mask for the fingers, unfortunately, so let's I'm gonna lock this one temporarily so I don't doesn't get in my way, and I'll add a point here and just a simple thing. We're not gonna worry about the hand outside of the panel, but here we're gonna need to be somewhat precise just for this last frame, really, because beyond that the hand is moving so quickly there's a lot of blur. I'm hoping we won't need to animate the shape of the hand at all, but we will need to animate where it's positioned, obviously. Let's see. I'm going to tap M a couple of times to open the mask's properties, and I'll blur this, feather it by like 3 pixels, and expand it a little bit so that it's in the right place. Something like that. Okay, now I'll also remember to keyframe the mask shape, mask path. Nothing worse than like going out and animating the mask and then realizing you haven't been animating it at all. You've just been moving it around and it's not been keyframed this whole time. That's a bummer. Okay, I need to switch this mask to none so that we are still on our original footage. And now I'll go down, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, move this hand and just kind of rotate it, double click this and rotate it, and try to get it to take the right shape. Now that we've got that shape stuff taken care of, let's unlock everything. The first mask will subtract, but the second mask will add the shape back in. And if we take this and just give it a simple effect of filling it with a solid color and make that color white, we have created a kind of sophisticated little mat. So I'm going to add another black clip beneath. So at first, we have the mat we just created manually. All of this, what you're seeing is this guy and the black underneath him. And at some point we have to decide, how do we smoothly transition to that? So I guess just on the very last few frames, I'm going to go ahead and animate the opacity of the black layer to nothing, and then the white layer like that. So this fake manual mask starts out at the beginning, but then goes away. And underneath is revealed this mask. So together, we get this nice, clean start. Let's look at what that did for our actual footage. Looks all right to me. But of course, we do still see some green stuff there, and that's because we're applying this mat to just a normal version of our footage as it was filmed. We now need to create a version of this footage that Keylight would normally create, where it sucks out all of the green. So let's do that manually. I believe this is a technique, a little trick I saw myself in a Video Copilot tutorial. So I guess you gotta steal from the best. Let's duplicate this shot. I unhooked the mat from it, so now I'm gonna duplicate it. And in this version on top, I'm gonna apply the keylight effect again. So keying, keylight. I'm gonna select well, let's go to some frame where it's clear. Select the color again. Let's go into the combined mat again. And now we can be very generous because we're not actually using this for matting purposes. So we're still going to get rid of the jacket and stuff, but we'll go ahead and kind of be generous and make sure it includes all of this, all of the pixels of the player and stuff. And it's okay if it sees a little bit of my face as well. So now what we want is we want the things it does in terms of getting rid of the green, but we don't want any transparency created. So the way you do that is you add an effect from the channel menu called Channel Combiner. And you switch this, the method here from straight to pre-multiplied, and you check this solid alpha box. And what that's done now is it's sort of made it it made it do everything that Keylight does, but instead of making this transparent, it just filled it with black. And the benefit of that is that now if we have this clip above our normal regular clip and we change the top clip's transfer mode to color, we get this. We get the exact copy of our footage with all the green completely removed. Now I can pre-compose these two guys into one and just call it like decast, I usually call it. The color cast has been removed. It's been decast. So now this decast version, I can apply the Luma matte to it again, and we get our nice clean final matte when we have parts like this, that stuff doesn't look green. So the tracking is done, the keying is done, and now we can turn our attention to the actual contents of the player, except I do want to address an issue, which is that now that everything's put together, we're starting to see how problematic our lighting is, because what we put in our player is going to just look normal, but we do need to put it in the context of how this shot looks. Or rather, maybe we should fix our shot so that everything looks optimal. We should give our shot kind of a what's sometimes referred to as a best look grade. The way I would do that is select the decast version, which is the actual visible part of the plate right now, and apply some kind of color correction to it. We got all kinds of tools here, but I like to use, for like fine-tuning kind of color correction, this plugin called Color Finesse, which comes with After Effects, but I like it because it's got its own interface, and most importantly, it has scopes. You could see what you're doing in a specific way. You don't just have to judge by eye whether things look right. So obviously here we have a lot of information missing in the bright parts of the image. So I'm just going to bring things up, the highlights, until the highlights start kind of clipping off there. And I'll raise the gamma as well. And I'll make sure that the shadows of our tones reaches the bottom. Something like this. I might want to pull out more information from the darks, maybe by increasing contrast a little and then pulling the contrast center downward a bit. Maybe I could still raise the gamma somewhat. I'm just trying to pull things out of the shadows while not getting the bright parts to look too bright. So this is what we started with, this is where we are now. And now that I have things a little bit brighter, I can see that things are maybe a little bit too warm. So maybe I'll move the whole thing over to the blue side. All right, so this looks much better to me. I'm going to say OK. And now it's just more realistic that I'm holding that thing when the scene is lit this way. Cool. So let's replace the checkerboard with something substantial. Let's go into the player content and put some piece of footage here. I got some random shot of some street cats outside my place. Let's see. Let's find some sort of interesting moment. Let's say this is going to be the first frame of the shot. And probably need to make this look a little bit better. Let's go back to that color finesse effect and apply it to this clip. Okay. Okay. So now, in terms of action on the clip, we're going to decide where it starts. So I'm going to put a little marker there. And in fact, I'll set the endpoint in there, rather. Let's delete the marker. And here, I'm going to look for the place where I press the play button, which is right then. So we're actually just about in the right place. And I'll set the endpoint of this. I'll set the clip to start at that point. And then I'm going to turn on time remapping on the clip and add a time keyframe there, and I'll jump to whatever the first keyframe of the real place where the clip starts when the camera was started to roll. I'm going to delete that frame so that this is the very first frame of this clip now. And if I extend its the actual clip trim, it's just a still frame up to that moment. So it's still until it starts to play when I press play. So as far as the content of our clip, we've done what we need to do. Great. But it's just a video in my hand. It should be a video player. So we're going to need to create the interface on the player. Let's do that in part 3.